Yeah, good. Oh, um, I.
Yes, yes. Yes. It's nice to be.
I have trouble with sleeping.
It's a bit new. Yes, I was talking.
Yeah.
It's yeah, yeah. Only
Possibly. They say. But I still I found it based on yeah. It's yeah.
no,
Yeah.
that's that. Yeah. Yes.
No, no, no.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. She would be good tonight. Amazing. No, he's coming out. I think there is
Yeah.
He says he's publishing on mine and guys. Yeah. Okay. Check that. I don't
Yes, and it gets down. Oh, then you
Well, the problem is that being it's not the big
We come to the big meeting, so we just get them for a fire.
Okay, good, isn't it? Especially for something that's being broadcast here.
Somebody go.
So because there were too many hands, I wouldn't get it. What is that normally in the HBS meeting?
Hi, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the meeting this evening. You may gather we have a slight technical issue at the moment in that there is no connection between the computers and the projector. The projector does not want to show the pictures at the moment, but which is a great, obviously, because one of the main things we want to see is the pictures. So we're going to start, and Dan will do his best to paint a picture, and the technical guys will carry on trying to get the HDMI cable to work, which it certainly is not doing at the moment. It seems to think it is, but it certainly it isn't. So on behalf of U3A, Haddenham U3A History Group and Haddenham Village Society, welcome to the meeting this evening. My name is Elaine Parks. I'm the Deputy Chairman of Haddenham U3A and also the leader of the History Group. I'm just going to do the housekeeping first of all before we get on to the meeting proper. Can I just remind you, I know that Lydia has been reminding everybody as they came in that if you do think you're going to be here for more than 2 hours, you really must put your registration number into the laptop so that you won't get charged for parking. Should by any chance there be a sudden fire or any other sort of emergency, we would like you to vacate the hall in an orderly manner, hopefully. And in true air stewardess style, I will tell you that there is one emergency exit on that side. There's an emergency exit at the back, the way that you came in, and another emergency exit over there. Can I also ask you to make sure that if you have a mobile phone with you, which I should imagine is absolutely everybody in the room, can you please make sure that it is either turned off or it is on silent? I'm now going to hand over to Brian Bowman, who is going to introduce Daniel.
Thank you, Elaine. And again, welcome to the U3A Local History Group and also to the Haddenham Village Society. I think this is the first time we've ever had a joint meeting, and the turnout is fantastic. Thank you very much for coming along. Daniel is at the present time the project manager for Cotswold Archaeology. He has had a long history, but bearing in mind he's young. In archaeology, having worked for Oxford Archaeology, English Heritage, and having done his PhD, and I will try and read it out so I get it correct, on the production and consumption of food from 1500 BC to 1086 AD, using data from developer-funded archaeology. And basically those last three words are what this is all about tonight, or the result of what it's all about. Because if developers, as at the Grove, wish to do development nowadays, almost invariably they have to have an archaeological study done as a first issue. If we overlook at any of the planning applications which go before the county, you will see that there's always an archaeological report. And invariably, in a situation like Haddenham, that leads to an excavation. And it was the excavation which was taking place. And one day, as I was taking the dog for a walk, I always look in a hole. I've had an interest in archaeology since I was a child. And on this occasion, there was a skeleton in the hole. And we'll be hearing all about that. So this is Daniel, and without the benefits of modern technology, he will paint pictures of what they were up to there.
Thanks for that introduction, Brian. Just not gonna hear myself. Can you still hear me? Yeah. I think maybe it's probably coming from up there. Sorry, that's just throwing me a bit. Um, so Brian's covered a couple of things I was going to say, but I can skip over these things, and I have to apologise about the lack of visuals for everyone. Perhaps we'll get those set up partway through, perhaps not. So the title of the talk that I'm going to give is "Everything is Older Than We Think." Subtitle: Discovering 4,000 Years of Life at Aston Road, which I think is perhaps better known here as the Grove, the new development, including the skeleton in the Grove, which is so close to Brian's heart. I will skip over the bit about me, as that's already been so ably covered. Apart from to say that I was principal author on a paper in the Records of Buckinghamshire that is about the site I'm going to talk about. Just sort of putting that out there for everyone. I was going to say that this presentation contains an image of human remains, but unfortunately, I won't get to see that. And I was going to go on to say, yeah, if anyone would be disturbed by that, then I'll give them a warning, and you can look away now. Anyway, skipping quickly over that. Brian's talked a bit about planning and archaeology, and I assume that everyone here understands the relationship of that, the requirement that the developers fund archaeology before planning. But you might ask, well, why does society require them to do this? You know, what's the purpose of it? And one answer to that is that it helps us to understand and preserve the places where we live, which gives a sense of place, and a sense of rootedness, perhaps. And that sense of place also connects into wider histories. Like local place connects into wider histories, and the imagined communities which we all belong to, the local ones, regional ones, national, and even global ones. And because of that, I'm going to move a bit between scales tonight, and talk about the site which Cotswold Archaeology dug at the Grove, but also about its wider context, its wider local context. And so I'll start with a bit about Haddenham. And now this is really tricky because this is an image I really wanted to show you. Haddenham, there were two, luckily for me, two very fine pieces of work done by my colleagues at Buckinghamshire County Council. The Haddenham Conservation Plan and the Haddenham Historic Towns Survey, which have done a lot of really detailed work with maps and collating all of the archaeological evidence gathered over the years into one document. And we can demonstrate from that that Haddenham probably was first settled probably between the 5th and 7th centuries CE, probably beginning at Church End in the southern part of the village. And we know we have documentary evidence that there was a minster church there by the 11th century, 10th century, I think. You probably all know this a bit better than I do, living here and being history buffs. So apologise for that. People are nodding at me. So this core of settlement is mapped out in the Haddenham Historic Towns Survey. And if you can imagine, you're standing at the southern end of the village, and there are various routes that go. One straight through the village, going north or south, another one coming in from the west, another one heading east, and another right of way, perhaps a track, heading off northeast towards Aylesbury. Just picture that. And we can see this conjectured to be there in the historic town survey in the early medieval period, so at some point 5th to 7th centuries. And we can see it on a map drawn in the early 19th century, which I can't show you, proving that it was there by the 19th century. Importantly, and the importance of this will become clearer later on. So to talk about the site that the Coastal Archaeology dug back however many years ago, and a bit of landscape context for that. So it's situated on low-lying ground, with the Ford Brook to the south and a ridge of higher ground to the north. In the past, this would have been good agricultural land. Obviously, on the southeast edge of Haddenham, now incorporated into Haddenham, as you know. So what did we find? What did we find when we went to dig there? Well, we found a series of scattered settlement and evidence for agricultural activity and burial, spanning a lot of periods from the Neolithic to the modern period, really, with gaps, so not continuous. We found a Neolithic pit containing pottery and food waste, late Bronze Age or early Iron Age farming landscape, consisting of scattered pits, ditches, and a Middle Iron Age trackway and enclosures, probably a farming landscape as well. The trackway coming in from northeast to southwest, and nothing in the Roman period, interestingly and significantly. And in the early medieval period, the period from the 5th to the 7th century CE, we found a human burial, a skeleton that Brian has already mentioned, and a pit, and not much else apart from that. The medieval modern period, the landscape was used for agriculture. We have evidence of plough furrows, headland banks, that sort of thing. So to go into a bit more detail, the earliest activity on sites. So this is the Neolithic, and it's a period that archaeologists call the Middle Neolithic, and we had a carbon date from this pit. I think if you imagine that the area of the grove we didn't dig the entire thing. We had several different excavation areas. We had a large area, largest area up in the northeast, which we called Area A. Another reasonably large area to the southwest of that, called Area B, which is where Brian found the skeleton, and then a series of much smaller trenches to the northeast of, I think, of Area B, between B and A. So we found this pit in Area F, a fairly small trench. It was isolated. It contained some pottery, some animal bone, charred hazelnut shells, and charcoal. And there's carbon dated it to the late 4th millennium BC, so about 3356 to 3103 BCE. And it suggests limited settlement, very marginal, not a concentration of activity, but perhaps a short-term camp, people moving through the landscape. But interestingly, the contents of this pit suggest a midden, so broken up, hazelnut shell, broken up bits of pottery, dark soil matrix. So people were there long enough to create that, but the nature of settlement in the Neolithic may have been much more mobile and ephemeral than we would like to think of as settlement in later periods, say the Roman and the Iron Age period. The pottery, again, it's a shame I can't show you this. It's a style of pottery called Peterborough ware. a sub style called mortlake ware, and this it's a highly decorated style of pottery with lots of little chord impressions and quite complex shape. This sort of bowl goes up and in and then out again. Yeah, why is that important? But it shows the complexity and the sophistication of the people at the time. You know, they were artistic, creative people. And then after that little burst of activity, there's quite a long break until about 1100 BC. And then we find some late Bronze Age and early Iron Age evidence that consists primarily of ditches, pits, and post holes, with some pottery, some burnt sheep bone, sheep or goat bone, charcoal again, and hazelnut shells, and snail shells indicating an open grassland landscape. So the question that this brings to mind is, was this a settlement, or was it a fieldscape, a working landscape, or maybe a bit of both? Probably on balance it's a working landscape. So there are some food remains in a pit, but they could be the remains of a meal eaten by people who are working within the fields. There's also a possibility there was a settlement nearby, well, that's part of the site, but we only found 3 post holes. So we have a ditch running with the grain of the land, really, sort of north to south, up from the brook towards the ridge of high land. So it's dividing up the land, suggests that people need to make a boundary for some reason. They want to separate out their animals from someone else's animals. That was in our area A, if you remember, off to the northeast. These 3 post holes in area B, a bit to the south. So we can date this through pottery to between the late Bronze Age and early Iron Age. We don't know exactly when within that period. It's more likely to be late Bronze Age. And again, we have another probable gap for a while. But then we get perhaps the first signs of a more organized landscape. So we have the creation of a series of enclosures which are bounded by ditches and probably banks, and a trackway bounded by 2 ditches, orientated from northeast to south west. So it's heading towards what is now Haddenham and away from what is now Haddenham. We don't find any evidence of domestic activity really with this stuff in the middle to late Iron Age. So this is 350 to 50 BC, somewhere in that time period. There's no Haddenham bone, there's no charcoal remains, there's no pottery. Probably a farming landscape, working landscape, much as it was later until very recently. How do we know it was middle to late Iron Age? We have a carving date, but I'll come back to that. So the trackway was a route across the landscape, flanked by ditches and probably banks. But it was not as simple, perhaps, as it may seem. So in one of the ditches that ran alongside the track, we found buried right in the base of the ditch in what we call the primary fill. So it's the fill that's gone in first to the ditch as it's been filled up. So it means it's early in the life of the use of the ditch. We found an articulated group of cattle bone, and this was part of the spinal column towards the rear end of a cow, and the ribs attached to it. So this is a piece of cattle carcass that has been carefully placed into this ditch. And it may represent food waste, butchery waste that people didn't want. But it also may represent something more significant, that it's a big piece of meat bearing. It's a meat bearing set of bones. it would have provided a lot of food for a lot of people. It's probably whatever it was, however it was put there, was the remains of a feast of some sort. You know, perhaps it was a feast given to people who'd come to work the land for some other community. A lot of stuff we found. A skeleton of an adult man in a grave, which Brian happened across, um, with an iron knife carefully placed under his left arm, which was folded across his body. His head was pointing to the west, his feet to the east, and analysis of his bones has told us that he led a fairly active lifestyle. So he had a degeneration of the spine, which indicates he spent a lot of his life squatting down. So you can imagine he may be working at something that led him to do that. And his bones were radiocarbon dated to between 642 and 685. So that's in the 7th century. On the cusp of what we would call the Middle Saxon period. The landscape clearly became a fully agricultural one. So we have the evidence of ridge and furrow ploughing across the land. We have what's called a headland, which is a boundary between parcels of ploughed land in the Middle Ages that runs pretty much in the same place as this, same line as this Iron Age trackway that I was talking about a few minutes ago. And that really is the story of the site from the late Saxon period, when Haddenham was, we know it was starting to develop until modern times. It was a field belonging to the village of Haddenham, probably originally part of a big open field, and then later on in the post-medieval period, divided up with enclosure, parliamentary enclosure. And that's the story of the archaeology of the site that got sort of archaeology dug. But it raises some really interesting, one particularly really interesting question that I found really fascinating. And I refer back to the title of my talk, which was "Everything is Older Than We Think," and that's a quote from the landscape historian W.G. Hoskins, who wrote that in the 1950s, and has since been proven more than right. I think most landscape archaeologists would agree. But it's been a very influential idea for decades amongst archaeologists and landscape historians. And I think the evidence that we found bears that idea out in a really striking way. And this is where, again, I'd really love to show you this map. So I have to try and paint it for you and let you imagine it. It's a map that's a copy of a map made in 1825, and it shows the old ridge and furrow and the field boundaries in the 19th century, and it shows a pathway, a right of way that runs northeast to southwest, away from Haddenham towards Aylesbury, across the middle of the grove where the grove turban is now. And we overlaid our excavation trenches on this map, and this is what I'm looking at now that you can't see, I'm afraid. But if you can imagine one of our areas, the area in which we found the Middle Iron Age trackway and the enclosures, the trackway is north, the enclosures to the south, and the path that's shown on this 9th century map runs right through the middle of boundary ditches of the Middle Iron Age trackway, which we know were there in the Middle Iron Age because of this articulated piece of bone on the carbon date. And with good evidence that it takes only about 30 years for a landscape to revert from farmland to wilderness and forest. So what does this mean? It means that it's been kept open and used for start right the way through from prehistory. Even though we didn't find any evidence of the Roman period, they must have been using it. They must have been keeping it clean. And this feeds into this wider understanding of our history and archaeology that I was talking about earlier, and big questions that archaeologists like to ask about landscape change or versus landscape continuity. There's been some work by a team at the University of Exeter, led by Professor Stephen Rippon, with Chris Smart and Ben Pears, a project they called the Fields of Britannia, which was all about looking for evidence of continuity in farming landscapes from the Roman period into the early medieval period. And they found, I think, quite surprisingly to them, not loads, but evidence of ditches and landscape boundaries that were established in the Middle and Late Iron Age and were still extant today in the landscape. So the boundaries have been in continuous use. They found examples there, got a long way from here. One in Staffordshire, Cathome, one in a place called Gun Hill in West Tilbury in Essex, another one in Somerset. And that's just a sample of a few more than that. But I think we can add this one at the Grove to that. That's what I'm arguing. And again, I've got a figure which is a photo actually of their book, which shows modern field boundaries in Essex with Iron Age ones and Roman ones alongside them or underneath them. So I'm afraid you have to imagine that. I'm sorry about this. So to wrap it up, I think I'm about time, is it? Yes.
You've got about another 10 minutes.
10 minutes.
What have I forgotten to say? I think I was going to mention, going back to the Middle Iron Age phase, some more local examples. So I think to reinforce my point about the potential special nature of the cattle skeleton in the ditch, there's another late prehistoric, so it's early or Middle Iron Age, early to Middle Iron Age ditch found at Princess Risborough with some food remains on a human skull. A kind of similar sort of situation. So that's a kind of piece of evidence to back it up. I was going to talk more widely about how what we found in the Grove fits into the local landscape. So the Neolithic evidence is fairly typical of Neolithic settlement in the Thames Valley and in the East Anglia. It's kind of dispersed pits. Usually, it's very rare to find Neolithic buildings. A lot of the subsistence, evidence of subsistence and food and farming is that they were using quite a lot of wild resources. So hazelnuts are a really important food source still. So still gathering, certainly they've got animals, they've also certainly got crops, but you have a sort of mobile, less what has been called, I think, tethered mobility. So that's a model of settlement, and I think it's perhaps starting to be challenged in places now, but it certainly, this evidence fits in with that, and it's a good interpretation for a lot of the stuff in the wider locality. Similarly with the Bronze Age, late Bronze Age, early Iron Age ditches there, field systems fairly widespread in the Upper Thames Valley and Middle Thames. Less widespread in the early Iron Age, less likely to be early Iron Age, to be honest. But you still find them, that kind of farming landscape fairly commonly through the Thames Valley, through the Vale of Aylesbury. And the Middle Iron Age is pretty typical, the Middle Iron Age stuff of the wider region. The early medieval period I've talked a bit about already. There's settlement of that period within the Vale of Aylesbury that we know about, indeed, because there's the evidence from Haddenham itself at the church end, and it's possible that some of the other ends in Haddenham were also settled at that time. So I think to move on to my summary, it's important to note that the continuity of field boundaries doesn't necessarily mean continuity of settlement or population. So settlements can come and go, but the fields still need to be worked. Populations can come and go, but still use the same field layouts and some of the same settlements, be influenced by the material organisation of the landscape that they find when they come. And indeed, we know now from ancient DNA that there was a fairly substantial influx of population from Germany and Scandinavia in the 5th and 6th centuries, at least into Eastern England. But I'd say the evidence from the Grove, from Haddenham, all taken together, raises this really important, if a little bit speculative, possibility of settlement continuity at Haddenham right through, because this trackway is clearly going somewhere and is still important to people when they're living at Haddenham in the medieval period and later, and it seems to be going to the same place to me. And I'm going out a bit out of the limb here. This is a little bit, it's certainly interpretative. But I'd say, is it possible that the Midline Age trackway that we found was oriented on or led to a settlement at Church End in the Midline Age? Could there be evidence for Roman settlement somewhere in that area as well? You can't answer those questions, but I think they're really interesting ones for future work. And I think looking towards future work is where I intended to finish. Sorry if I've raced through that a bit. I'm very sorry for the lack of.
Yes, I will go and check and see if there's any images.
It would have perhaps been a bit slower if I'd had to.
Yeah, check and see if there is any.
Yeah.
Coming up. Any questions, please? I have a roving mic, so I will turn up. Yes. Coming round. I can just see.
Yeah, it's Lorna. In the Iron Age findings, did you find any iron? I mean, were there any of those big
No.
bits of tools or? So it was other things that you were dating.
Actually, yeah. So we got the date from the cattle bone, and it's interesting. Actually, I think if we hadn't done that, we wouldn't have written this up in the same way, and I wouldn't be here talking about it tonight. Perhaps I don't know. Maybe it would be difficult to stretch to 45 minutes on the burial alone. I think on the Saxon burial, but initially we were dismissing the whole thing as post-medieval and modern and not worth writing up, but we persuaded Nick Cook, who was the archaeological consultant, I've got my acknowledgement slide, that we should just get it carbon dated just to see, and he reluctantly agreed. And then partly the reason why I chose the title Everything is Other Than We Think was sort of, but a pointed comment to Nick in a friendly way. Yeah.
Hello, Brenda Stuckey. Oh, yeah. Just going back to the skeleton,
Yeah.
have you got any features like how tall? Or do you know if it's male or female?
Sorry, you don't mention that. It was a man, about 45 to 50. And he was about average height, so he's about 5'6", 7.
Okay. There's nothing to link them with the exhibition in the museum, which is the Saxon,
Is that in
Borough.
Haddenham? or
not
Aylesbury?
Haddenham, sorry, in Aylesbury.
Well, I think I've not seen that exhibition, but I think certainly, you know, it's very local, isn't it? So yeah, this person would have known people in Aylesbury, no doubt. Would have gone to Aylesbury and come back from Aylesbury, and you know, there would have been a connection there.
Right.
I think it would be really interesting to do ADNA on this skeleton, but unfortunately, it's not available as a commercial service. ADNA analysis, it's still, you have to be part of a university research project. It's not yet cheap enough to be viable for us. Although we do submit our results to our samples to research projects when they come along asking, and in the future this one maybe.
There's a lady, like, can you pass it back?
Hello, Anne. You said that it was unlikely that the body was alone, that there was nothing else around. Why did you extend the search around everything that seemed to work?
Well, and what defines our search area is usually the impact of the development. So if the house builder or developer or whatever they're building funds the whole thing, and they will, you know, so we're building our houses here, or we're putting our road here, or our storm drain there, and that's where we dig. And so we dig up to the edges of where they're developing, not further. These trenches were done originally as under something called watching brief, where the earlier results from the evaluation, for whatever reason, were decided as to be not significant enough to warrant excavation. Well, it's obviously you know, not right, but it's quite hard to predict what you're going to find from evaluation. So the building was going on. We had someone there who realised there was something. We stopped the development and dug that stuff up. If we'd found that skeleton during the evaluation, then we may well have done a bigger area, but it shouldn't be the case that you're finding the burials will have gone unreported and destroyed by that. There was an archaeologist there. What's going on?
Are there any other questions?
Where is the skeleton now?
So it's in Buckinghamshire Archives, Buckinghamshire Museum.
Yeah, I'm Carol. I'm wondering where the track from the road goes across to Bishopstone, and presumably HS2 land. That's all been
That's very possible. Yes, we wrote before we did the postdates for HS2. Well, the postdate still is still ongoing, so we've done part of it. But it's now paused. As you know, it's very, very expensive, and there's a lot of scrutiny of costs, and the archaeology is very, very, very expensive. So the archaeology of the post-excavation publication of HS2s have been done, led by an outfit called Headland Archaeology, and they may well come up with that kind of connection. It'd be interesting to see. It's clearly going somewhere. So why not?
Bruce Alexander. Can you tell us anything about the nature of this burial? I mean, were you able to assess if it was a burial in a hurry or sort of something sort of more ritualistic? And the fact that feet were pointing east and the head west, does that give any sort of clue about cultural position of it all?
So the first part of it, it's a formal burial, and it's in a in a way that's pretty standard for the period. So it's provided with a grave good, a knife that would be a possession of most people. So it's not someone with a lot of status, and it's the pathology of the bone would bear that out because someone who had a hard working life wasn't particularly wealthy. But they were formally buried
Right.
in a careful way, certainly. The orientation east west is that's the orientation of a medieval Christian burial, but also the orientation of a lot of late Roman ones. Certainly by this period, we'd expect, Christianization was happening. So I can't remember the date of the last pagan Saxon king, but it's got to be, I think it's around 700. So it's certainly, there would have been people who would come to think of themselves as English who were Christians by that point. So I think that fits. Is that
We happened to visit.
Right.
We happened to visit the church at Wing All Saints earlier this week, and the crypt there was built in 660. And I did a little bit of homework, and I think the first missionaries were sent to Aylesbury around about that time.
Okay.
So the early 7th century, late 7th, early 8th. So that confirms your correct.
yeah, that fits very nicely. I didn't know that, so thank you.
Hi, sorry, mine is a bit of a young person's question. I heard about the techniques that you used to sort of excavate the site.
Yeah.
How useful is, the ground penetrating technology
The-
in such situations?
Well, there was a geophysical survey beforehand, so it's very useful for deciding where to place your trenches and your excavation areas. And it can tell you, it can tell you a lot about whether there's archaeology in a landscape, and it can tell you, it can give you a good idea of what kind and what kind of data it is. So yeah, it's a very, very useful technique. And I tend to take it a bit for granted, I suppose, to come at the end of the process. This is very, very long process of people writing what we call desk-based reports, where they look at what's already been found, and then you do a geophysical survey and maybe some ground penetrating radar, what have you, and then you do evaluation trenches, then you do an excavation, then you write it up, and that's when I start, is when it all comes back. But it's incredibly important. It's a really exciting time for archaeological science. It's transforming. There are questions that I found fascinating as an undergraduate in the mid-90s that I thought I will never know the answer to. That now we have the answer to because of things like ancient DNA, carbon dating, Bayesian modelling of carbon. So it's really important. It's good to have a young person's question.
You say you found post holes. Were these evidence of a building or barricades?
Certainly not barricades. So if I could do that both hand by side and then one here. And the most likely thing is, I think, it's what would be called a 4-post structure, but one of the post holes has gone or not been found. So they were structures which held grain stores probably, and so that would suggest settlement. I think one thing I should perhaps have talked a bit more about at the very beginning is the way these sites are formed and the way we excavate them. So you have activity from the past. You have obviously people walking around on the ground surface building things. You have digging holes and ditches, and they fill up. We have them digging a hole and building a floor, to level the ground, and then gets abandoned and falls down. People rob it, take stuff away, and then it gets ploughed, and gets ploughed and ploughed and ploughed for hundreds and hundreds and 1,000 years. And every autumn or every spring, that ground is left fallow for a while, and the wind and the rain takes a little bit away, and so you end up mostly probably a bit lower than you were in the past. And then we come along with our machines, and we dig with the digger down to what we call the natural, which is we take the topsoil and subsoil off, and that exposes things that people have dug in the past into that natural ground surface. But there's a lot that's gone, and so you can have one side of a house, maybe there's a bit of a slope in the ground, have the post sort of one side, the other side's been removed by the plough. So that perhaps explains that strange collection of 3 post holes.
Are there any other questions? So,
Hi, so obviously there's a lot of developments going on in Haddenham. Are you guys and your team involved in any other areas around here?
At the moment, we're not. I don't think I've moved offices, so I currently work in our science office, but I used to work in Milton Keynes, and this is our Milton Keynes area. We've got a map on the wall where we divide the whole country into the bore, and this bit falls within Milton Keynes, and it's a bit like, don't touch my sites. I'm not aware of anything doing around here at the moment, no. But I could be caught out on that.
I read somewhere that the knife was an old knife, not contemporaneous with him. Is that correct?
It was 5th to 6th century. 5th, yeah, it might have been slightly old. Let me have a look. I've got it written down somewhere. I think that the knife is compatible with that carbon date of 642 to 685, but the style of knife certainly can be dated earlier. It maybe doesn't quite go up as far as 685, but it's in the ballpark. So I suppose I would take the carbon date, but I mean it's a good point. People have heirlooms and they repair things, and also styles of the rate at which technology and style changes varies, as you know, in different periods of the past. So, in many periods of the past, people didn't change the way they made things as rapidly as we do now, for example.
Well, another one. The ulnar was broken. Do you have any theory about how that happened?
Yes, I imagine it could have been the pressure of the digger tracking back over as they stripped the soil. Often, yeah, I would think so. Very often, I see the skull is fractured as well. The front of the skull's collapsed, and very common. You get the pressure of soil over years kind of crushes things.
Any more questions, please? Oh, sorry.
Christy, was there any signs of how he died?
No, but it's fairly likely, unfortunately, although he was only 45 to 50, that he died of old age. So it's yeah, 50 was a good age in that period. But we don't have any specific information.
Yeah.
You can see how very interested everybody is in the skeletons.
Yes, yeah, I think I've perhaps let my own interest in the landscape kind of skew things a bit. I should perhaps have done more on the scale. I think it's interesting. And we managed to have a good chat about it afterwards.
Yes, it'd be interesting to find the exact spot. And perhaps we could stick a stone.
Would it be more broad?
Yes.
See where it is. It was the footpath used to go. Remember the footpath which used to go towards Piggywinkles? And it was a diagonal, if you remember. And it was on the left-hand side going toward Tiggywinkles, probably about 12 and a half, 15 meters in an easterly direction on the left-hand side, walking towards it. So there you are, somewhere over there. Could be in that the green area or Sanders Garden.
Just publicising
Yes,
the dead under their houses.
they're always filming Midsummer Murders here. Get extra if you agree to a murder.
Okay.
Quite dark in our case. Any other questions? Or points? If not, Daniel, thank you for fighting against the odds.
Thank you for inviting me. It's good thing to talk about.
Yeah,
Thank you.
you have painted a lovely picture, and I think you have understood. Fortunately, of course, as a matter of interest, we did circulate the Grove. Are there any people who live at the Grove? Oh, great! Great. Oh, fantastic!
Yes, but some of those are actually members.
That's right. But it's good to say that people are from there. So for a lot of us, of course, we can see the picture, well, pictures it is now. So thank you very much for coming along this evening. And you
I could send slideshow to you and you could, I don't know, circulate it somehow.
yeah, what we could do actually is we have meetings of the local history group every month. If you sent us the slides, we could have a slideshow sometime with the slides or what feature them sometime.
Yes, we probably could, or we could do a WeTransfer.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would have to be that, I think.
Yes, because yeah, well, this is what we do in the genealogy group when we have talks. Then people who want the presentation.
Can I say one more thing? I
Yeah.
forgot. I always forget my acknowledgements, but because usually I rely on the slide going. But I just thank Dendara Homes for funding the work, and Nick Ashfield who works there, Steve Weaver and Nick Cook of Tetra Tech Consulting of the Art Consultants, Bill Markham and Eliza Alcazar of Buckinghamshire County Council, who were the art curators and planning archaeologists. Carolyn Adams of Cotswold, who's the outreach officer, who helped me set it up. And then finally I had Brian and Elaine, Keith and Lorraine organising the talk.
You're all clapped, but perhaps you could have another clap to Dan for doing this fantastic presentation this evening. Dan, you've done a starter.
And before we disappear, could I just make a plea on behalf of the Village Society? We are very keen to have some more folk join our committee. So the Village Society, as you know, organises meetings about once a month or so from across a broad category of subjects. We only meet as a committee about once a month, and the meetings last about 1.5 hours. So the commitment is not huge. So if any of you would like to join the committee, we would love to have you on board. Our next Village Society event is our garden party, which is in the garden of Cynthia and Roderick Flood on the 8th, Wednesday the 8th of July. So that's for members of the Village Society. We'd love to see as many as possible. Come along on Wednesday, the 8th of July, at the floods. Lovely garden. So thanks a lot for coming on this evening. Thank you.
And can I just say that the next meeting of the history group, the Haddenham U3A history group, we will be doing a guided walk around Tame. We will have a guide from the museum. He's going to take us to some of the interesting